evening and welcome to First Baptist Church Hazel's Wednesday night Bible study. I'm mighty glad to have you tonight. I know the wind like to blow us all away before we can get in the door, but we made it okay. And that's a good thing. You're looking really good. Thought we'd stand up and do a little bit of praise songs. If you got it left in you, I know you, that's good. All throughout the scriptures, it refer to Jesus, Lord, and God as their rock and their fortress and their refuge. I think that's where this idea of this song came from. Where do I go when there's nobody else to turn to? Who do I turn to when nobody wants to listen? Who do I lean on when there's no foundation standing? I know He's able. I go to the rock for my salvation. I go to the soul that the builders reject. Run to the mountain and the mountain stands by me. When the earth around me is sinking, saying Christ the Son solid rock I stand. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. Do I hide till the storms have all passed over? When the winds of sorrow threaten, is there a refuge? In the time of tribulation, when my soul needs consolation, I go to the rock. I go to the rock for my salvation. I go to the stone that the builders reject. I run to the mountain and the mountain stands by me. When the earth around me is sinking sand, Christ the solid rock I stand. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. I go to the rock for my salvation. I go to the stone that the builders reject. I run to the mountain and the mountain stands by me. When the earth around me is sinking sand, Christ the solid rock I stand. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. Ooh, amen. I didn't run off leaving too bad this time. I had on the brakes. I was trying to slow down. And then he did reach down and touch me, thank goodness. Shackled by a heavy burden, neath the load of guilt and shame, in the hand of Jesus touch me, and now I am no longer the same. He touched me, oh, he touched me, and oh, the joy that floods my soul. Something happened, and now I know he touched me and made me whole. Since I met this blessed Savior, since he cleansed and made me whole, I will never cease to praise him. I'll shout it till eternity rolls. He touched me, oh, he touched me, and oh, the joy that floods my soul. Something happened, and now I know he touched me and made me whole. Something happened, and now I know he touched me and made me whole. Thank you. Have a seat.
All right, good to see everybody tonight. If you would, turn in your Bibles this evening to 1 Kings chapter 2. I know he's working on it. 1 Kings chapter 2. All right. I got a green light. There we go. How about that? I'm glad you're here tonight. We are in 1 Kings chapter 2. We're going to look at chapter 2 and chapter 3 tonight. If you remember the last couple of times, we looked at the transition between David and Solomon. Tonight, David is going to give his last words to Solomon, but Solomon is now king. If you remember the last time, Solomon's older brother saw that his dad, David, wasn't doing too well, and he felt like he should get to be king, and so he just rounded up a bunch of people and some leaders that were willing to support him. And they had a big party and just announced him king. And so David was informed about that from one of the prophets, and he took measures very quickly and had Solomon crowned king and sat on his throne, rode his donkey to announce to everyone he was the God-endorsed or God-chosen and David chosen king of the nation. And so that all just happened last time when we come to 1 Kings chapter 2. You do remember that his brother, Solomon said to his brother, because that was worthy of death. But Solomon said to his brother, I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to kill you. But we're going to see what happens tonight with his brother. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. So these are the first decisions of Solomon. We're going to see two famous stories tonight about Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. So here are his last words to his son. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, show yourself a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways and keep his decrees and commands, his law and requirements, as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. Now you notice David is fully aware that God has made a promise to him, but it is a conditional promise. In order for the promise to be fulfilled, his descendants have to be faithful, and so he's trying to instill this into his son Solomon. Because as we're going to discover throughout the life of Solomon, not tonight, but in weeks to come, Solomon was not as godly of a man as David. He was a nice guy, and most of the time he did what he was supposed to do, but he was not a man after God's own heart. He didn't have a passion for his faith like David did. David knows his son and he's concerned, and so he tells him those things. By the way, he says, three things? He says, so be strong, show yourself a man, and do what God tells you. That's basically the summary there. Be strong, show yourself a man, do what God tells you. In fact, this term, so be strong or show yourself a man, paraphrasing, he's saying you need to man up. It means to submit yourself to God, but also when you have sons and you want them to grow from being boys to men, you want them to man up. In other words, stop behaving like a boy. Stop behaving like a child. Stop thinking of just yourself. Stop being afraid of all the time. You take the reins of leadership and responsibility and you do the hard things in life. Be a man. And so that's what he's telling Solomon. There's good reason for that. Solomon has no experience at really anything except being a rich, spoiled prince. He's done nothing. At this point in his life, David was famous. He'd already killed hundreds of people, of enemies. He'd already killed Goliath. He'd already killed lions and bears with his slingshot. He was a rough, tough man of a boy. He was more of a man when he was 13 than Solomon is as a grown young man here. And so David is concerned, understandably so. So he says, put the Lord first. That's really the heart of the matter and his deepest concerns. David's words actually parallel those of Moses when he commissioned Joshua back in Deuteronomy chapter 31. First, Moses admonished Joshua to be a man and to face his responsibilities with courage and faith. And then Moses gave the law to the priests and admonished the people, including Joshua, to know it and to obey it, because those were the greatest concerns of Moses as well. He wanted Joshua to be a man and to be a godly man. I have two sons myself, or three children, 2 sons and a daughter, and Like most of you who are parents, it is my greatest desire for my sons to be a man and to be godly men. David wants the same for his son. He also reminds his son, though, of this special covenant God had given him concerning the Davidic dynasty. He warned Solomon that he could mess it all up for the entire dynasty, which he could if he disobeyed God's law. Verse 5, now you yourself know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me. Again, this is David speaking to his sons, his final wishes. You yourself know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me. Remember, Joab was his general. What he did to the two commanders of Israel's armies, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle. And with that blood stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. Now, notice he doesn't say, kill him. I mean, that would have been shorter. I think that's what David is implying here when he says, don't let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. But he says that instead of, you know what to do, executing. Verse 7, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. They stood by me when I fled from your brother Absalom. So he's calling for his son to take care of some matters of justice where there are evil people that he's concerned that will take the kingdom. But he also tells him to reward some people that have been so good. And in this case, it's Barzillai. Verse 8, and remember, you have with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who called down bitter curses on me the day I went to Mahanaim. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. But now, do not consider him innocent. You're a man of wisdom. You will know what to do to him. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. And again, the implication sounds pretty clear. Here he says the word blood, adds that. Twice now he's referred to Solomon as wise, or the word wisdom. Did you notice that? For both of these guys and both of these problems or concerns, the thing is, Solomon doesn't really have any wisdom at this point. David is hoping that his son will gain wisdom. He has no experience and he really has no wisdom for anything yet. Maybe David knows something that Solomon doesn't yet know. So basically, Solomon is telling his son, protect the kingdom. He knew that there were perils lurking in the shadows in the kingdom, and he warned Solomon to act immediately and deal with two dangerous men. The first was Joab, the commander of David's army. And even though Joab stood by David through many difficult trials, from time to time he had asserted his own will and been guilty of murdering innocent men. And so David says he needs to stand account for that. Joab had been involved in David's scheme to kill Bathsheba's husband also, Uriah, in 2 Samuel 11. And perhaps the crafty general was using his knowledge of what happened with Bathsheba to intimidate the king. We don't know. David did not mention Uriah or Absalom to Solomon, and Solomon already knew that Joab was a traitor to the king. The second dangerous man was Shimei, and you guys remember this if you were here. You know, there was a coup attempt from his son Absalom. David actually had to flee with his men and his families, had to flee Jerusalem. And as he was fleeing Jerusalem, I called it the walk of shame, there was this guy Shimei who came out of the blue and started hurling stones and things at David and spitting at him and hurling insults. David spared his life, but he is concerned about the character of Shimei and causing trouble to Solomon. Verse 10, Then David rested with his fathers, that means he died, and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. We're going to see that again at the end of our lesson tonight, that same statement. So for the rest of this chapter, Solomon cleans house. There is unfinished business with several difficult people, and Solomon doesn't hesitate to deal with them. And I commend him for this because, again, he's young and he has no experience. He is not a soldier like his father was at this age. He, to our knowledge, has never killed anybody, never fought a battle. And so David, I think, is concerned that Solomon's going to let these people trounce all over him. But Solomon actually takes care of business. Verse 13. Now Adonijah, and again, Adonijah is Solomon's older brother that felt he deserved to be the king, and he tried to take the kingdom just before David died, before Solomon could be crowned king. It failed, of course, but he's still there. He wasn't executed, and so he's still in the shadows there. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. If you want the king to do something, go to mom. Bathsheba asked him, "Do you come peacefully?" He answered, "Yes, peacefully." Then he added, "I have something to say to you." "You may say it," she replied. "As you know," he said, "the kingdom was mine." Is that true? Nope. It was never his because it was not ordained by God. Now, in his eyes, it was his because of what he's about to say, which is true in the next sentence. He says, "As you know, the kingdom was mine. All Israel looked to me as their king." That part's true. Israel had pronounced him king for about 4 hours. "But things changed," he said, "and the kingdom has gone to my brother, for it has come to him from the Lord." So this is his way of saying to Bathsheba, I got it. The gig's up. This is God ordained. There's no challenge here for this request I'm about to make. Verse 16. "Now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." "You may make it," she said. So he continued, Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." "Very well," Bathsheba replied, "I will speak to the king for you." Now notice, Bathsheba, the elderly mother of Solomon, the wife of King David, Bathsheba does not promise him. She does say to him that he's allowed to make his request. She does not promise to him that she will fulfill his request. She doesn't say to him, "Ask whatever request you want, and I'm going to do that." She says, "You may make the request." Now he says, "Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." Now what difference does that make? Who's Abishag? Do you remember? This is just from 2 weeks ago. King David was old. Remember, he had no good circulation left, and he was cold at night. Put all the blankets on him. He was still freezing. So they didn't have electric blankets. So they decided, well, he needs a warm-blooded woman. And again, I'm guessing that Bathsheba was old and cold too, didn't have good circulation, or she could have done it. So they get this young, beautiful woman. It mentions a couple of times that she's beautiful, and her name is Abishag. And so she stays with David at night in his bed just to cuddle up and keep him warm. It says that there was no hanky-panky going on, but she was in the bed with the elderly king in his last days just to keep him warm. Now, whether officially or unofficially, that would make him his wife or his concubine. She was his companion, however you want to phrase it, and everybody knew it. She belonged to David. And so Abishai goes to Bathsheba and says, "Can I have now that David's gone, he doesn't need to stay warm anymore. I want to stay warm. Can I have Abishag as my wife? And so verse 19, when Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, the king stood up to her, bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne. He had a throne brought for the king's mother, and she sat down at his right hand. I have one small request to make of you, she said. Do not refuse me. The king replied, make it, my mother. I will not refuse you. So she didn't say that to Adonijah, but Solomon does say that to his mother. Verse 21, so she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah. Well, he doesn't take that very well. Verse 22, King Solomon answered his mother, why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he's my older brother. Yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who has established me securely on the throne of my father David and has founded a dynasty for me as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon gave orders to Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and he struck down Adonijah and he died. So when I first read this, I thought, well, that seems harsh. He just wants a wife, right? Well, first of all, opinions differ in the interpretation of Bathsheba's role in this scenario. Some say she was very naive in even asking Solomon. But Bathsheba had already proved herself to be a courageous and an influential woman. And by this time in her life, she was also a very wise woman, no doubt. It's likely that she suspected another plot because she knew that possession of a king's wife or concubine was evidence of possession of the kingdom. Solomon immediately realized it. So instead of debating Adonijah, Bathsheba simply repeated his request and fulfilled her time with Adonijah and said, okay, I'll do this. I'll go ask. And so she asked. She did what she was supposed to do. She simply asked. But Solomon immediately knew. Of all the women in the kingdom that he could have had, he chose to have this concubine of David. And he knows there's symbolism involved. In fact, that's why he sounds like he flew off the handle, but he's very specific in his names when he says, you might as well request the kingdom for him, because that's the symbolism. After all, he's my older brother. In other words, many people think he should have gotten the throne. And certainly he thinks that. Adonijah thinks that. And then he says, yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah. So Abiathar the priest and Joab, Abiathar was the priest of David and served David many years faithfully, but for whatever crazy reason, Abiathar decided to support Adonijah for king instead of Solomon. And Joab, David's own commander, did the same thing. So that's why Solomon brings them up here. It's those three guys that nearly took the kingdom from him. And here his mother comes in immediately, his first day on the job, as it were, after his dad dies, and Adonijah has made this request. So David thought, no, we spared you when you tried to take the kingdom, but I'm not looking this over. You're done. So he had him killed. So verse 26. To Abiathar the priest, the king said, go back to your fields in Anathoth. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carry the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships. So Solomon removed Abiathar from the priesthood of the Lord, fulfilling the word of the Lord had spoken at Shiloh about the house of Eli. So he defrocked Abiathar the priest, who had supported Adonijah, and sent him to retirement at the priestly city of Anathoth, about 3 miles from Jerusalem. This had been the home of Jeremiah, the prophet, or would become the home of Jeremiah the prophet. In deposing Abiathar, Solomon fulfilled the prophecy given to Eli that his family would not continue in the priesthood. God himself had withdrawn and made that prophecy. Instead, Zadok, the priest, was made high priest, and his descendants filled the office until 171 BC. In other words, for 800 years. Solomon recognized the fact that Abiathar had faithfully served his father, so he did not have him executed. All right, verse 28. Any comments or questions so far? Are you with me? All right, verse 28. When the news reached Joab, who had conspired with Adonijah, though not with Absalom, he fled to the tent of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar. Now, again, there are three guys that were principally in the middle of this coup attempt. There was Adonijah, who, where is Adonijah now? He dead. There was Abiathar. Where's Abiathar? He's been excommunicated and depriested. And so there's only one left, and really the ringleader, and that's Joab. And Joab's got it coming for more reasons than one. And he is the very first one David warned his son Solomon about before he died. Verse 29, King Solomon was told that Joab had fled to the tent of the Lord and was beside the altar. Then Solomon ordered Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, to go and strike him down. So Benaiah entered the tent of the Lord and said to Joab, the king says, come out. So the sanctuary was a place of refuge. It was supposed to be a safe zone. That if you were there, your hands were on the altar, you're safe. That's home base, usually. The king says, come out. Of course, Joab don't want to come out because he knows what's going to happen. The gig is up. But he answered, no, I will die here. Now notice, Joab doesn't fight. He could have fought Benaiah, and Joab is a tough guy. He probably could have killed him and a number of other guys. Who knows? And now, Benaiah was a tough guy too. So he says, no, instead of fighting, he says, no, if I'm going to die, I'd rather die here at the altar. So Benaiah reported to the king, this is how Joab answered me. Then the king commanded Benaiah, do as he says, strike him down and bury him, and so clear me and my father's house of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed. The Lord will repay him for the blood he shed, because without the knowledge of my father David, he attacked two men and killed them with the sword, both of them, Abner, son of Ner, commander of Israel's army, and Amasa, son of Jether, commander of Judah's army, were better men and more upright than he. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But on David and his descendants, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. In other words, Solomon is saying before God, I don't want me, my father, or anybody in my household to be responsible for the blood that Joab shed. Verse 34. So Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, went up and struck down Joab and killed him, and he was buried on his own land in the desert. The king put Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, over his army in Joab's position and replaced Abiathar with Zadok the priest. So again, he's just doing house cleaning things that you need to do when you become king, especially when the king was your father and ruled for so many years. Verse 36, then the king sent for Shimei. So Shimei is the only one left now of the scoundrels. This is the one who heckled David. And David had spared him. Then the king sent for Shimei and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live here, but do not go anywhere else. The day you leave and cross the Kidron Valley, you can be sure you will die. Your blood will be on your own head. Shimei answered the king, what you say is good. It is good because he's not, I'm sure he half expected for the king to say, well, the gig is up. You were mean to my dad, off with your head. Instead, he says, you need to move to town. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So Shimei says, that's a good deal. What you say is good. Your servant will do as my lord the king said. And Shimei stayed in Jerusalem for a long time. And so Shimei realizes, so this is what Solomon is doing. Shammai didn't like David because he felt like Saul in his house should be the king, not David in his house. And that's why he heckled David, because he was mad at David, he hated David, and he loved the house of Saul. And so Solomon realizes that Shammai may come to this point in his life where he could be out rallying people, the people of Benjamin or the tribe of Benjamin and others, to rally behind somebody of his choosing in the future and pull some scheme. So Solomon says, I tell you what, I'm not going to execute you, but you're under house arrest. Not house arrest, town arrest. And Jerusalem wasn't a huge city at this point. He says, you got to move here to Jerusalem. You can never leave. As long as you stay in Jerusalem, you're good. But you cross the valley, and right outside of Jerusalem, all the way around is valleys. He said, you cross the valley, that's the end of you. And Shammai says, okay, good deal. And for a long time, 3 years, that worked. Verse 39, but 3 years later, 2 of Shammai's slaves ran off to Achish, son of Maacah, the king of Gath. And Shammai was told, your slaves are in Gath. At this, he saddled his donkey and went to Achish at Gath in search of his slaves. So Shammai went away and brought the slaves back from Gath. When Solomon was told that Shammai had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had returned, the king summoned Shammai and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you? On the day you leave to go anywhere else, you can be sure that you will die. At that time you said to me, what you say is good, I will obey. Why then did you not keep your oath to the Lord and obey the command I give you? The king also said to Shammai, you know in your heart all the wrong you did to my father David. Now the Lord will repay you for your wrongdoing. But King Solomon will be blessed, and David's throne will remain secure before the Lord forever. Then the king gave the order to Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck Shammai down and killed him. The kingdom was now firmly established in Solomon's hand. So there's nobody else left to do a coup attempt. Does that make sense? Well, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it? Any comments or questions before we look at chapter 3? Adonijah?
I think he knew what he was asking was beyond the pale.
Yes.
He tried to get around that by getting Bathsheba to ask.
Yes. Adonijah knew what he was requesting was not going to fly. He knew that if he went straight to David and said, no, it's just a waste of time. He's getting himself killed. He thought he would try to manipulate Bathsheba into doing his bidding, which is part of what made Solomon so mad, I think. And so he had it coming. Anybody else? Okay, good times. Chapter 3, verse 1. When Solomon ascended the throne, this is not verse 1, I'm sorry. This is a little introduction paragraph I have. When he ascended the throne, the people of Israel soon learned that he was not another David. He was a scholar, not a soldier, a man more interested in erecting buildings than fighting battles. David enjoyed the simple life of a shepherd, but Solomon lived in luxury. Both David and Solomon wrote songs, but Solomon is better known for his proverbs. We have many of David's songs in the book of Psalms, but except for Psalms 72 and 127 and the Song of Solomon, we have none of Solomon's 3,000 songs. They have not survived. David was a shepherd who loved and served God's flock, while Solomon became more of a celebrity. When David died, the people mourned. After Solomon died, the people begged his successor, King Rehoboam, to lighten the heavy yoke his father had put on their necks. Solomon is mentioned nearly 300 times in the Old Testament. Is that not astonishing? And a dozen times in the New Testament. He's listed in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1. And he is cited as an example of splendor in Matthew chapter 6 and of wisdom in Matthew chapter 12 and Luke 11. He is identified as the builder of the temple in Acts 7, and one of the colonnades in the temple was named after him, and we see that in John chapter 10. All right, now verse 1. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. Now, right off the bat, boom, He clears house, and then he starts getting married. Now, he doesn't stop here. This is just the warm-up. How many wives is he going to have? 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's 1,000 wives. So Solomon made an alliance, and so he starts with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because the temple had not been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the statutes of his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burnt incense in the high places. Wasn't supposed to do that. Solomon's name comes from the Hebrew word shalom, which is the common greeting of Israelis even today. It means, what does that mean? It means peace. And during his reign, the kingdom was at peace with his neighbors. His father David had risked his life on the battlefield to defeat enemy nations and claim their lands for Israel, but Solomon took a different approach to international diplomacy. He made treaties with other rulers by marrying their daughters, which helps to explain why he had 700 wives who were princesses, as well as the 300 concubines. It appears that Solomon entered into treaty arrangements with every petty ruler who had a marriageable daughter. Yet Moses in the law warned the Jewish kings not to multiply wives in Deuteronomy chapter 17. His first bride after he became king was the daughter of the Pharaoh in Egypt, Israel's old enemy. This alliance indicates that Egypt had slipped much lower on the international scene and that Israel was now much higher because Egyptian rulers did not usually give their daughters in marriage to the rulers of other nations. It's significant that Solomon did not put his Egyptian wife into the royal palace where David had lived because it was near the Ark of the Covenant, but housed her in another place until his own palace or her own palace was completed. He spent 7 years building the temple of God, but he spent 13 years building his own palace. Interesting. Verse 4, the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Wow. Verse 6, Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong, for who is able to govern this great people of yours? Now, I give Solomon credit, and I think we all do here. When somebody thinks they know everything, there's not a lot to work with. Now, I won't say that Solomon was a humble man all of his life, but he humbled himself before God, and he accepted the reality. We live in a culture that doesn't care for reality much. We just make up whatever we want. But he was a realist, Solomon. He realized, I'm just a dumb kid. There are millions of people here. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not trained. I'm not qualified to do this. I need to know what to do. So it was a fair request. It was the right request. Interestingly, David, by the way, his father had the prophets Nathan and Gad as his counselors, both of them prophets. But there seems to have been no prophet in Solomon's circle of advisors. Twice God spoke to the king through dreams. God sometimes communicated his messages in the Bible through dreams, not only to his own servants, but also to those in other nations, such as Abimelech in Genesis 20, the Egyptian servants of Pharaoh in Genesis 40, and Pharaoh himself in Genesis 41. Solomon heard God say, ask, what shall I give you? And the Lord's command and question were a test of Solomon's heart. By the way, the word ask is found 8 times in this passage. What people ask for usually reveals what they really desire, and what they desire depends on how they envision their life's calling. Had Solomon been a warrior, he might have asked for victory over his enemies. But he saw himself as a youthful leader who desperately needed wisdom so he could adequately serve God's chosen people. He had succeeded David, Israel's greatest king, and Solomon knew that the people couldn't help but compare and contrast father and son. But even more, he had been called to build the temple of God, an awesome task for such an inexperienced leader. Solomon knew he couldn't accomplish that great venture without wisdom from heaven. So again, my hat's off to Solomon, at least on this day. Verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. You always want to start this with, if it's talking about you, in my case for me, and for his case Solomon, that the Lord was pleased with his request. That's what we're here for, to please the Lord. And so God was pleased with it. Verse 11, so God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment and administering justice, I will do what you've asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you. Listen to this. Nor will there ever be. God says, I'm going to make you so wise, Solomon. You're going to be wiser than anybody that's ever lived in the past or in the future. That's quite a promise, isn't it? And so he says that in verse 13, moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both riches and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And here's the word, if you walk in my ways and obey my statutes and commands, as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke and he realized it had been a dream. Now notice, and it's very interesting, that he could have asked for these things, and God says, because you didn't ask for the wrong things or for selfish things, you asked for the right thing, I'm going to give you those things as well. But one of those things, and only one of them, had a condition to it. And that is, if he walked in the way that was right before God, God would give him what? A long life. So he didn't unconditionally promise him a long life. That one was conditional. He's going to get the money, he's going to get the fame, as well as the wisdom, but he doesn't get a long life unless he's obedient. He returned to Jerusalem. This is verse 15. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court. Verse 16, now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I had a baby while she was there with me, and the 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night, took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I'd born. The other woman said, no, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours. But the first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. The king said, this one says my son is alive and your son is dead, while that one says, no, your son is dead and mine's alive. The king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, cut the living child in 2 and give half to one, half to the other. But the woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son and said to the king, please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him. But the other said, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave this ruling, give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother. When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. We need a Solomon today in our country. You know, I did not watch the State of the Union address last night. Sorry, those are just boring. But I did see some highlights. And there have been so many State of the Union addresses in my lifetime, and for most of you and yours as well. They all sound pretty similar. Everything is awesome if it weren't for those other awful people on the other side of the aisle. Now, both sides do that. It's all a big pep rally, you know. Wouldn't it be nice to have somebody that genuinely was wise in there? Not just a politician, but somebody who was the wisest person on the planet. Wouldn't it be interesting if instead of having a contest of who could get themselves elected, we simply had a contest of wisdom? And we found the wisest person out of 300 million people and just automatically made them the president. We need somebody like that. Our world needs people like that. So Israel was blessed to have Solomon as their king, at least to this point. Like his father David, Solomon gave the common people access to the king. Did you notice that? God had given Solomon a special gift of wisdom, and now he could put it to use. He had stood before the ark, the throne of God, and now his people could stand before his throne and seek help. But for Solomon to receive 2 prostitutes at his throne was certainly an act of kindness. Like Jesus, he welcomed publicans and sinners, that is, tax collectors and sinners. Except that Jesus did more than solve their problems. He changed their hearts and forgave their sins. In every way, Jesus is greater than Solomon. And that's a quote from Matthew chapter 12, verse 42. It wouldn't be until Christ that somebody's wisdom would surpass Solomon. So Solomon certainly made a good beginning, for he loved the Lord, walking in the statute of David, his father. That was verse 3. But a good beginning doesn't guarantee a good ending. Saul, the first king of Israel, started out with humility and victory, but he ended up being rejected by the Lord and committing suicide on the battlefield. Solomon himself would write in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 8 one day, "The end of a thing is better than its beginning." In fact, if you've read Ecclesiastes, I need to preach from Ecclesiastes. I haven't done that in a while. It's a heart-wrenching book. It's not the book of someone who has an ultimate success story. Now, there is great wisdom in Ecclesiastes. You know how it starts. Meaningless. Everything is meaningless. A chasing after the wind. It's kind of heart-wrenching. He also says, a good name is better than a precious ointment, and the day of death better than the day of one's birth. Kind of a bittersweet wisdom that Solomon had. All right, any comments or questions about this chapter or about Solomon so far? Okay, you're a great group. Let's end there, and we'll start there in chapter 4 next Wednesday. If you would, in the time that we have left, take your